Get out of that seat now, or I'll have you removed from this aircraft.
This is my assigned seat. I'm not moving.
The seat was already his. That was the part no one seemed willing to accept. Marcus Webb had boarded Apex Airlines Flight 347 at 7:42 in the morning through Gate C-19 at O'Hare, carrying a worn leather briefcase and a tablet loaded with merger documents that needed his attention before noon. He had waited at the end of the boarding line even when a man in a navy blazer cut directly in front of him without apology. He had done these things not because he was in a rush to be invisible, but because he had spent 43 years learning the quiet geometry of moving through spaces that were not always prepared for him. Seat 2A was a window seat. He had chosen it for privacy, not prestige. The leather was wide enough that he could set his briefcase beside his feet without it toppling. The window gave him gray morning sky over Chicago, pale and flat, the kind of sky that made a person feel the day had not yet decided what it wanted to be. He had placed his tablet on his knee, opened the acquisition overview, and started reading. He was 3 paragraphs in when the footsteps stopped beside him. She was holding his boarding pass between her fingers, like it was something she had found on the floor. Her name badge read Lauren E. Her smile was practiced in the way that smiles sometimes are when they cover something the face does not actually feel. She was in her mid-30s, hair pulled back, uniform pressed without a crease. Everything about her appearance was professional, only the gesture was not. "Sir," she said, "this seat is not available to you." Marcus looked up from the tablet slowly. He was not startled. He had heard sentences shaped like that before. They came in different forms, different rooms, different uniforms, but the shape was always the same, not the words, the assumption behind them. "My boarding pass says 2A, he said. Lauren's smile thinned. "I can read, sir." A few passengers turned their heads. The man in seat 2C, late 50s, heavy jaw, reading a folded financial newspaper. He looked up briefly, then back at his paper, with the air of someone who had already decided this was not his problem. 2 rows back, a young woman in a dark cardigan lowered the book she had been holding and watched. Marcus kept his hands visible on the armrests. He had learned that, too, where the hands were, where the eyes were. The 1,000 small adjustments a person learned when the world sometimes was threat, where there was only presence. There must be a misunderstanding, he said. Lauren glanced toward the front galley, then back. "That is what I am here to resolve." Her voice carried the careful evenness of someone reciting policy without being sure what the policy actually said. Somewhere in the cabin, a phone camera clicked. Marcus did not react to it. He studied Lauren for a moment, not with hostility, not with challenge. He simply looked at her the way a person looks at a situation they have seen before and hope not to see again. He noticed that she held the boarding pass at a slight angle, as if presenting evidence at a hearing where only one side had been heard. He noticed the glance she gave toward the galley, checking, or perhaps hoping someone was watching and would step in. He noticed the way she squared her shoulders when she said the word resolve, as if the situation had been decided and his role was simply to accept the decision. He had sat in boardrooms where men did exactly the same thing, the posture of certainty, the vocabulary of authority, the absolute conviction that because they held the paper, they controlled the outcome. He had learned a long time ago that certainty was not the same as correctness. They see. "Then there must be a misunderstanding," he said again, "and I am happy to resolve it. But I will need a clear reason before I move anywhere." Lauren's cheeks colored slightly. She set the boarding pass down on his tray table rather than handing it back to him. "Our system is showing a concern with your booking." "What concern?" She hesitated. "Booked through a third party, possibly." Marcus met her eyes. "I did not book through a third party." Lauren pressed her lips together. "Sir, I am going to need to verify this with my supervisor." "Of course," Marcus said. He folded his hands in his lap. "I will be here." She turned and walked toward the galley with quick, sharp steps. The sound of her heels on the cabin flare was small, but it made people look. It made the moment made it feel like something was being processed, documented, corrected. When really all that was happening was one person deciding that a picture did not match its frame and walking away to find someone who would agree. Marcus turned to the window. Chicago lay beneath a ceiling of cloud. Ground crews moved below the wing in orange vests, loading bags, checking clearances, doing work that had nothing to do with any of this. A baggage cart trundled slowly past. A man in a yellow vest checked something on a clipboard. Ordinary labor, ordinary morning. Inside the cabin, something ordinary was failing. The man in 2C lowered his newspaper just enough to glance at Marcus. He did not speak. He looked the way people look when they are deciding whether a situation is going to affect them, and have determined that as long as it does not, it is not their concern. Behind Marcus, the young woman in the dark cardigan had not looked away. She was still watching. Her phone was in her lap now, and she had not decided yet what to do with it. Some people lifted their phones when they saw injustice coming. Some people waited to see if what they were seeing was actually injustice before they acted. She was in the space between those two things. A long breath, a question forming. Marcus did not look back at her. He knew she was there. He knew the phones were there. He did not need witnesses. He did not need an audience. He needed only one thing, which was the simple and apparently impossible act of sitting in a seat he had purchased legally, flying ticket to a city where he had a board call at 1 in the afternoon. He thought of his father, a mechanic from Detroit who used to say that the price of dignity is sometimes having to prove you already paid it. His father had said it without anger, the way men of his generation said hard things, as fact, not complaint. You carry the receipt. You show it when asked. You try not to let the asking hollow you out. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and checked his phone. One message from Patricia Reed, the company's chief operating officer. Board call confirmed for 1 p.m. Have a good flight. He almost smiled. Lauren returned from the galley with her chin slightly higher. Behind her walked a man named Craig Whitfield, late 40s, silver at his temples, a tablet pressed against his chest. His title was cabin supervisor. His expression was the kind people wear when they have decided to be reasonable about something they have already made up their minds about. Mr. Webb, Craig said, reading the name from the boarding pass. I'm Craig Whitfield, cabin supervisor. I understand we have a situation. Marcus nodded. We may have a misunderstanding. Craig's smile was brief and controlled. Good. I'm sure we can sort this out quickly. He set his tablet down and looked at the boarding pass, then at the confirmation number on his screen. There was a pause. The pause lasted longer than it should have. Then he looked at Marcus. Our system flagged your booking. We're going to need to reseat you in the main cabin while we verify. A quiet sound moved through the first-class cabin. Not quite a murmur, more like an exhale that people tried to keep small. Marcus looked from Craig to Lauren and back. Receipt me where? Craig said, there is an available seat in coach. Marcus's voice remained even. I purchased first class. My boarding pass says seat 2A. The gate agent scanned it. The system accepted it. You are asking me to move to a different section of the aircraft before telling me what the system actually flagged. What did it flag? Craig's jaw tightened slightly. Sir, crew members have discretion when there is a concern about cabin order. What concern? Marcus asked. His voice did not rise. It simply repeated the question. The way a person repeats a question when they are not confused, but are choosing to give the other person one more opportunity to answer honestly. Lauren answered before Craig could. You refused a direct crew instruction. I declined to vacate a seat I legally purchased, Marcus said, without a reason that holds up to basic scrutiny. The young woman 2 rows back raised her phone a little higher. Craig stepped closer. His voice dropped. Mr. Webb, I understand your frustration, but I need to ask you to cooperate so we can resolve this before departure. Marcus looked at him. I have been cooperating since the moment she approached me. I showed my boarding pass. I showed my license. I answered every question. I have not raised my voice. I have not disturbed anyone. B. If you can show me written documentation of a valid reason to move me from my assigned seat, I will consider it. Otherwise, I'm going to stay where I am. In seat 2C, the man with the newspaper folded it deliberately. Unbelievable, he said, not quietly enough. Marcus turned his head. I agree. The man looked up. Then maybe you should make this easy for everyone. Marcus held his gaze for 1 second. Easy for whom? The man had no answer. B. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked away. Lauren touched Craig's arm. Craig, we need to get this handled before the captain is involved. Craig nodded and reached for the interphone on the cabin wall. He pressed the button. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured. Captain Holt, he said, we have a situation in first class. We need you. Marcus looked back out the window. The gray sky above O'Hare had not changed. B. The ground crews were still moving, doing their ordinary work. He reached for the phone on his armrest and typed a short message, just one word, to a number set under the label idle. He set the phone face down and looked at the boarding pass on his tray table. The letters were clear. Seat took his name, his confirmation number. Whatever happened next, the seat was already his. It had been since the moment he booked it. And somewhere in this aircraft, that quiet fact was preparing to matter in ways that Lauren Pierce and Whitfield had not yet begun to imagine. Craig Whitfield had handled difficult passengers before. He had handled men who screamed at him over wine selections, women who demanded upgrades with entitlement, so absolute it bordered on performance art. Children who kicked seats for 6 hours without apology from their parents. He had handled them all with what he privately called the voice, a register that was firm without being rude, authoritative without being threatening, designed to communicate that the matter had been considered and the decision was final. He used the voice now. Mr. Webb, he said, I want to be clear. This is not a personal matter. Our procedures exist to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers. Marcus looked at him. Which procedure allows you to ask me to leave a seat I purchased based on a concern you have not identified? Craig tapped his tablet. The flag in our system is a booking irregularity. What kind of irregularity? Craig looked at the screen. Lauren looked at Craig. For a moment, the two of them stood very still in the same way that people stand still when they are hoping a question will expire on its own. Marcus waited. He was good at waiting. He had spent the last 2 decades in rooms where waiting was a form of pressure, and he had learned that the person who could wait longest usually held a room. Craig said, we'll need to contact our reservations desk to clarify. Marcus said, my confirmation number is on the boarding pass. You have access to the full record. Have you pulled it? Craig hesitated for half a second too long. Lauren stepped in. Sir, this process takes time. We need you to cooperate. I have cooperated. I showed my boarding pass. I showed my driver's license. I am sitting here with my hands on my armrests, asking real questions. Cooperations does not require me to vacate a seat I paid for while you look for a justification that may not exist. The cabin had gone quiet in the specific way that cabins go quiet when people are pretending not to listen. The man in 2C had given up the pretense of reading his newspaper and was watching openly. Now, 2 passengers in row 4 exchanged a look. An older woman near the window held her handbag against her lap with both hands as if anchoring herself. From seat 3B, a voice said quietly but clearly, he's been calm the whole time. Lauren turned. The young woman in the dark cardigan had her phone raised at about shoulder height. Was Diane Foster, 29 years old, traveling to Phoenix for a job interview she had spent 3 months preparing for. She had not planned to become part of anything this morning. She had not planned to say anything. But the word calm had come out before she could stop it, because it was simply true, and the situation was beginning to feel like one where the truth needed someone willing to say it out loud. Ma'am, please do not interfere with crew operations, Lauren said. I'm not interfering. I'm a witness. Lauren's expression tightened. I'm asking you to put your phone down. B. Diane did not put her phone down. She was breathing faster than she would have liked. Her hands were not entirely steady, but she kept the phone where it was because she had the sense that the moment it came down, something would be lost that could not be recovered. Craig placed his hand on Lauren's arm briefly, a small gesture back at Marcus. Mr. Webb. He looked back and make this simple. I'm going to make this simple. B. The captain has been notified. We can resolve this cleanly if you agree to move temporarily. Marcus studied him. You keep using the word temporarily. Craig said, yes. How long is temporarily? Until we verify the booking. B. How long does verification take? Craig blinked. It varies. Has the verification been started? Another pause. Another half second that carried more information than Craig intended. B. In that half second, Marcus understood something he had already suspected. There was no verification underway. B. There was no flag in the system. There was a flight attendant who had made a judgment, a supervisor who had backed her without looking at the record, and now there was the question of how they were going to walk this back without admitting that. The answer, apparently, was that they were not going to walk it back. Craig said, the captain will be here shortly. He can speak with you directly. That is fine, Marcus said. B. He reached into his jacket slowly, took out his driver's license, and placed it on the tray table beside the boarding pass. His full name, his date of birth, his address, everything verifiable. He spread both documents flat and left them there like a man who had already won and was simply waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. In seat 2C, Raymond Cole checked his watch. It was 7:51. His connection in Phoenix was at 11:15. B. He had 2 hours of buffer, which was 3 times what he usually required. But the buffer was beginning to feel less comfortable than it had when he boarded. He thought about saying something else. He had already said, unbelievable, and it had not produced the result he was hoping for. The man in 2A had turned it back on him in a Raymond he did not entirely understand. And Raymond Cole was not a man B who liked to say things that came back at him like that. He said nothing. He looked at the window instead, at the gray Chicago morning, at the maintenance crews finishing their work, at a bird that landed briefly on the wing and then was gone. Diane Foster kept the phone raised. She had called her mother before boarding and told her she was nervous about the interview. Her mother had said, just be yourself, B, which was the sort of advice that was either useless or the most important thing anyone had ever said, depending on the moment. She was not sure which it was right now. She was thinking about what just be yourself meant when you were watching a man answer every question put to him and still being treated like a problem in need of removal. She thought about her grandfather, who used to drive through towns in the South in the 60s and keep both hands on the steering wheel and speak to police officers with careful, deliberate courtesy that his grandchildren did not fully understand until they were old enough to understand why it had been necessary. She thought about the gap between that world and this one, and how sometimes the gap was wide. And sometimes you were sitting in a first-class cabin, watching a man with a valid boarding pass explain his right to exist in the seat he had purchased. And the gap did not feel as wide as you had hoped. The sound of the cockpit door opening carried through the cabin. Everyone heard it. Lauren straightened. Craig stepped back slightly from Marcus's row, creating the visual space a supervisor creates when higher authority is about to arrive. Even Raymond Cole, without fully realizing it, sat up a little in his seat. Captain James Holt stepped into the cabin. He was 54 years old, with the posture of a man who had spent 30 years giving orders in enclosed spaces and had never once doubted the right to give them. His uniform was exact, every stripe, every crease, every button where it was supposed to be. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who understood that authority arrived did not the right need to rush. It already arrived the moment he stepped through a door. He stopped, arrived. He stopped at the front of first class and looked at the passengers. Then at Craig, then at Lauren. Then finally he looked at Marcus. He did not look at the boarding pass. He did not look at the tablet or the documents or the confirmation number. He looked at Marcus Webb the way a man looks at a situation he has already been briefed on and has already decided, before seeing it clearly, what it is. Marcus looked back at him. His hands were in his lap. His back was straight. His face showed nothing that could be called anger, nothing that could be called fear, only a kind of patient clarity, the expression of a man who has been in rooms where other people held all the power and has learned that the most important thing in such rooms, but to remain completely and without apology, himself. Captain Holt walked down the aisle. His footsteps were measured. When he reached seat 2A, he stood above Marcus and looked down. "Mr. Webb," he said, "I'm Captain Holt. I understand there's an issue." Marcus looked up at him. "There is a situation. I did not create it." Lawrence said, "Captain B, he has been uncooperative since the beginning." Marcus turned to her. "That is not accurate." She said, "You refused every instruction." "I declined to leave a seat I purchased legally. I answered every question." B, "I provided 2 forms of identification." B, "If that is uncooperative, the definition needs revision." Captain Holt raised one hand. His voice was flat. "Enough." The word landed hard in the enclosed space of the cabin, and for a moment the only sounds were the thin hiss of the air system and the faint muffled noise of the airport beyond the fuselage. He looked at Craig. "Give me the record." Craig handed him the tablet. Holt looked at the screen. His eyes moved over it. His jaw moved slightly once, as if making a small adjustment. He looked at Marcus. He looked back at the screen. Then he set the tablet down on the armrest of the empty seat across the aisle. "Your boarding pass and record appear to match," he said. "But the crew has raised a concern about your conduct." Marcus said, "What specifically did I do?" Holt said, "There is a concern about your overall behavior." B. From 3B, Diane said quietly. He never raised his voice. Captain Holt looked at her. "Ma'am, I watched the whole thing from the beginning," Diane said. She was trembling slightly, but her voice stayed level. He showed his boarding pass. He showed his license. He asked reasonable questions. He never threatened anyone. Holt looked back at Marcus. "Sir, I have to ask you to understand." Marcus said, I understand perfectly, Captain B. What I am asking is for you to tell me what specific conduct, not a general concern, not a feeling, a specific action, justifies asking me to leave this aircraft." The question sat in the cabin like a stone dropped still water. Holt pressed his lips together. He was aware of the phones. He was aware of Diane's raised camera. He was aware of the passengers watching from every angle. He was aware that the answer to Marcus's question was not the answer he wanted to give, because the honest answer was nothing. There was nothing specific. There was an attendant who had seen a black man in first class, and decided the picture did not match the frame. First, by a supervisor who had backed her without checking the record. And a 30-year career habit said when the crew had a concern, the captain backed the crew. He was beginning to understand that this was one of the times that habit was going to cost something. He said, "Sir, if this escalates further, I will have to contact airport security." Marcus looked at him steadily. "Then contact them." He paused. "But understand that the moment you do, this is no longer a seating question. It becomes an incident." Holt straightened. He turned to Craig without another word, and Craig picked up the interphone, and the cabin waited, because whatever happened next, everyone in first class could feel that the situation had crossed some invisible line and was not going to resolve quietly. Marcus turned back to the window. The gray sky above O'Hare held everything still. Below, the ground crews had finished their work and moved away from the aircraft. The tarmac was empty and pale. Everything outside looked ordinary. Everything inside was not. The interphone call lasted 40 seconds. Craig Whitfield kept his voice low and his back to the cabin, but the acoustics of a pressurized aircraft do not work in favor of privacy. Passengers heard fragments. Situation in first class. Passenger not present. Need airport security to assist. When he hung up and turned around, the cabin had changed. not in any physical way. The seats were the same. The air was the same thin recycled breath that all aircraft breathe. But something in the quality of the silence had shifted, the way the air changes before rain, when the pressure drops and the world seems to hold itself and wait. Diane Foster had not lowered her phone. She was aware, somewhere in the back of her thinking, that she was now embedded in something larger than she had planned for. She was also aware that the awareness itself, fly till was a took to itself or to took to flight, was a kind of luxury. She she could set the phone down. She could go back to her book. She could choose at any moment to not be part of this. Marcus Webb did not have that option. He was sitting with his hands visible on the armrests, his boarding pass and driver's license flat on the tray table, and a posture that had not changed since the moment Lauren Pierce first walked up to him. He looked like a man who had been through versions of this before and had learned, through repetition, exactly how much energy to give it and how much to hold in reserve. The answer appeared to be give it very little, hold the rest. Captain Holt stood in the aisle. He was still deciding how to manage the next few minutes. In 30 years of flying, he had developed a reliable framework for handling passenger situations. The framework was built on the assumption that when a crew raised a concern, it was a real concern. That crews did not manufacture friction for its own sake. That when a passenger's the refusal itself was the evidence. He had applied this framework hundreds of times, and it had almost always worked. He was beginning to feel the edges of almost always. Sir, he said to Marcus, I want to resolve this before security arrives. Marcus said, I want to resolve it too. Then cooperate with us. Marcus looked at him with the particular patience of a man who has explained something twice and is now deciding whether to explain it a third time. I have been cooperating, Captain. If there is something specific I have refused to do that falls within a legal crew instruction, tell me what it is, and I will consider it. I am not going to agree to leave a seat I paid for based on a concern no one can describe by. Lauren, standing 2 steps back from Holt, made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated exasperation at a volume the whole cabin could hear. Marcus turned to her. He said nothing. He simply looked at her in the way that a person looks at someone who has been making noise and inviting them to speak more clearly if they have something to add. Lauren met his eyes for a second. Then she looked away. Raymond Coles had stopped watching. He was staring at his closed tray table with an expression Marcus could see. Lushman's lens, who had made a series of small decisions this morning and was beginning to accumulate the weight of them. The sigh, the comment about making things easy, the pointed declaration that his schedule was being inconvenienced. They had seemed reasonable at the time. The natural reactions of a man who simply wanted to get where he was going without complications. Sitting with them now, they felt differently. He could not have said exactly why. He just knew that the man in 2A Twap had asked simple questions and received no answers, and that he, Raymond Cole, had responded to that by suggesting the man make things easy. And easy for whom, the man had said back to him, with a calm that was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. Easy for whom? Raymond did not have a good answer for that. He was not used to not having good answers. At the forward galley, a second flight attendant, a younger woman named Brianna, who had been assigned the forward economy section and had forward to get supplies, stood near the partition and watched. She had not been part of any of this. She had heard Lauren's initial approach. She had heard Lauren's heard the interphone on call. She did not say anything. She was not in a position to say anything, or so she told herself. She was 26 years old and 6 months into this job, and the hierarchy of the cabin crew was something she had learned to navigate carefully. But she was watching, and the thing she was watching was not adding up in a way that she could make comfortable. The sound of footsteps at the aircraft door carried into the cabin. Ket. 2 sets, deliberate and unhurried, the walk of people who understood that their authority was portable. and did not need to be announced. Officer Sandra Mills was the first through the door. She was 52 years old and had worked airport security at O'Hare for 21 years. In that time, she had escorted truly dangerous people off aircraft, helped medically distressed passengers reach gates, talked down three separate individuals who were in the middle of mental health crises in very public places, and developed a methodology for reading a room that was as reliable as anything she had been formally trained to do. The methodology was simple. Before you look at the person someone has called you about, look at everyone else. She stepped into first class and looked at everyone else. She saw Diane Foster with the phone raised, and she saw Diane Foster with the phone raised and the expression of one who had committed to something and was not entirely sure what came next, but was not backing down. She saw Raymond Cole sitting very still with his eyes on his tray table. She saw the older woman near the window with her handbag pressed to her lap. She saw the scattered phones throughout the cabin, some raised, some lowered to laps, all of them recording. She saw Lauren Pierce standing slightly behind Captain Holt with her chin lifted and her shoulders tight. She saw Craig Whitfield with his tablet and the careful blankness of a man trying not to show what he was feeling. Seated, hands on armrests, back straight, documents flat, Marcus. Documents flat on the tray table. The expression of a man who was not performing calm, but was actually calm, which was a different thing, and Sandra Mills knew the difference. Behind her, Officer Kevin Greer stepped in. 29, broad through the shoulders, he already oriented toward Marcus, the way a person orients when someone has pointed and said that one. He had his hand loose near his belt, not reaching, just ready. Sandra did not look at him, but she registered it. Lauren stepped forward before anyone spoke. That's him, she said. Seat 2A. He has refused every crew instruction and he is preventing the flight from departing. Sandra looked at Lauren. She did not answer her. She looked back at Marcus. Sir, she said, can you tell me what happened? Lawrence is sin. Lawrence said, I just told you what happened. Sandra said, I asked him. The silence that followed, that sentence was very small in duration and very large in effect. Lauren's mouth stayed open for a moment. Craig looked at the floor. Captain Holt's posture changed by some fraction that was not visible to most people in the cabin, but was visible to Marcus. Marcus looked at Sandra Mills and said, I boarded with a valid first-class ticket. I showed my boarding pass and my driver's license. I was asked to move to the main cabin without a clear reason. I declined. The captain was called. He asked me to leave the aircraft. I declined that as well. That is the complete account. Kevin Greer frowned. Crew has the authority to remove passengers. Marcus nodded. When there is a documented safety concern. Is there one? Greer looked at Holt. Holt looked at Craig. Craig looked at his tablet. Sandra said, was the passenger yelling? Was he threatening anyone? Diane said from seat 3B, no. He never raised his voice. Sandra turned slightly. Were you present for the full exchange? Diane said from the very beginning. I recorded most of it. Sandra looked at her for a moment, taking in the phone, the expression, the slight tremor in the hand that held it. She had seen courage in many forms over 21 years. She recognized it even when it was wearing a cardigan and shaking a little. She turned back to Marcus. Sir, do you have additional documentation beyond what you've already shown? We have been through this, Lauren. Deckenturnire. Marcus looked at Lauren, then back at Sandra. He said, I have one more piece of identification. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Kevin Greer shifted his weight. Placed a hand out briefly toward Greer, a small gesture, palm slightly out. He stopped. Slow, please, she said to Mark. They are slow, he said. He removed a slim leather card holder. He set it on the tray table. He opened it. Inside was a single black card, heavy stock, B. A small silver emblem in the lower right corner, the Apex Airlines compass rose. The same one that appeared on every aircraft tail, every boarding pass, every annual report. Beneath the emblem, printed in clean silver type, B, was a name and a title. Craig Whitfield saw it first. He was closest, and he had been looking at the tray table. because looking anywhere else had become uncomfortable. His eyes moved over the card. He read it once. E. Then he read it again. E. The tablet in his hands did not move, but his grip on it tightened. Sandra Mills stepped forward and looked at it carefully. She read the name. She read the title. E. She read it in a way that left space for everyone near her to hear. Marcus Webb. She said, Chairman, Board of Directors, Apex Airlines. The cabin went very quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting, something deeper. E. The quiet of people who have just understood something they cannot understand. E. Lauren Pierce looked at the card, and something moved across her face that was not quite recognition and not quite regret, and was something in between that did not have a simple name. She had asked this man to move. She had called him difficult. She had stood in the aisle of his airline and told him his seat was not available to him. Kevin Greer took a half step back without appearing to realize he had done it. Captain Holt was very still. His face had the look of a man doing rapid calculation in a system that had just been told its basic assumptions were wrong. Marcus did not look at any of them with triumph. He did not look at them with anger. He looked at the card on the tray table for a moment, as if making sure it was still there, and then he looked out the window. The gray sky above O'Hare had not changed. The runway was still pale and wide and empty, but whatever was going to happen next, it was not going to be small. Captain Holt cleared his throat. Mr. Webb, he said. His voice had changed. There was a new texture in it, careful, measured in a different way than before. I didn't realize. Marcus looked at him. His voice was quiet. That is exactly the problem, Captain. Lauren sat on the trotida. The card sat on the tray table. No one moved to pick it up. It was a small object, about the size of a credit card, maybe slightly thicker. Black on its face with that small silver compass rose in the corner. It did not glow. It did not make a sound. It just sat there in the recycled air of the first-class cabin and rewrote everything that had happened in the last 20 minutes. Captain Holt was the first to speak. He said, Sir, would you like to speak privately? We can step off the aircraft and no, Marcus said. The word was soft final, the way a door sounds when someone closes it from inside. Holt blinked. Sir, I think it would be better if we handled this away from. This did not begin privately, Marcus said. He looked at the captain. It will not be corrected privately. Holt took a breath through his nose. He was aware of the phones. He had been aware of them since Sandra Mills walked in, and the cameras became impossible to not notice. In 30 years of flying, he had mostly managed passenger situations before they became events. He was understanding now that this one had become an event at some point earlier in the morning, and no one had recognized it until it was too late to contain. Lauren's lips were parted. She had not moved in over a minute. She was staring at the card with the expression of someone watching a vehicle they were certain was going to stop, and then it does not stop, and the understanding arrives too late to do anything about it. Mr. Webb, she said, I had no idea who you were. The sentence hung in the cabin like smoke. Marcus turned to look at her. He waited. She swallowed. I would never have. She started, and then stopped. Because there was no version of that sentence that ended well, and somewhere in the part of her brain that had not been crowded out by panic, she knew it. You would never have treated me this way if you had known I had power, Marcus said. She opened her mouth. She closed it. There it was, the truth. Standing in the aisle of a pressurized aircraft at 37,000 feet from the ground, or actually still on the ground, still before departure, still in the gray Chicago morning, and there was nowhere for it to go. Sandra Mills looked at Lauren, and something in her was not quite sympathy and not quite judgment, and was something more complicated. She had been working airports for 21 years. She knew what it looked like when someone was surprised to discover they had been wrong. She also knew what it looked like when someone was surprised to discover they had been caught. The two things looked similar from a distance, and the difference was only visible up close, and only to someone who had been paying attention long enough to know what to look for. She had been paying attention. Captain Holt said, Mr. Webb. I owe you an apology. Marcus looked at him. Yes. He let that sit. Then, but not only to me, he. Holt tilted his head slightly. Marcus gestured toward Diane Foster without looking away from the captain. You had a witness in seat 3B who tried to provide a direct account of what happened. You allowed it to be interrupted and dismissed. He did not raise his voice when he said it. He stated it in the tone of a man reading observations into a record. Then he gestured toward the cabin generally. You allowed the pressure of other passengers and patients to shape your response to this situation. He looked at Lauren, and you accepted discomfort as evidence. Lauren flinched. Marcus continued. His voice did not accelerate. It did not rise. It remained measured and clear. The voice of a man who was not performing anger because he was not angry in the simple way. He was something more complicated than angry. That is how people get hurt in public, he said. Not always with force. Sometimes with tone, with suspicion, with a policy invoked at the wrong person for the wrong reason, by someone who assumed they already knew what kind of person they were dealing with before they had a single fact. Diane lowered her phone a few inches. Her eyes were wet. She had expected this to resolve with shouting, with drama, with a man leveraging sudden power to create maximum damage to the people who had wronged him. That was the narrative she had been half prepared for, the one that made sense as a story. What she was watching instead was something harder to categorize. A man calmly listing consequences. A man naming a wound without turning it into a weapon. Sandra Mills nodded once, almost to herself. Kevin Greer stood near the aircraft door with his arms at his sides, and if Tislab earlier certainty replaced by something quieter and less comfortable. He looked at Marcus the way young people sometimes look at someone older when they realize they have walked into a room with a set of rules they were never taught. Craig Whitfield had not spoken in several minutes. He was holding his tablet. He was not looking at the screen. Raymond Cole, in seat 2C, had his eyes closed, not sleeping, thinking, or trying to. The tray table in front of him was still closed. The newspaper he had been reading was folded in half beside him. He could hear everything being said 4 feet away from him, and he was not going to look over, not yet 8, because something about looking over felt like it would require something from him that he was not ready to give. Holt cleared his throat. Mr. Webb, our COO has been attempting to reach you. He paused. And operations has put a hold on departure. I know, Marcus said. He picked up his phone from the armrest. It was already lit. Michelle Hart's name was on the screen. He answered. The face that appeared on the video call was a woman in her early 50s, sitting in what looked like a conference room with a floor-to-ceiling window behind her, showing another city's skyline. Her expression was the expression of a person who had been given alarming information in the last few minutes and was calibrating how alarmed to appear. Nathan, she started, then caught herself. Marcus, I'm so sorry. He looked at her steadily. Don't apologize to me yet. She went still. He turned the phone slightly so the camera showed the cabin behind him, Lauren near the aisle, Craig with his tablet, Holt with his precise uniform and changed expression, the passengers watching the phones, Diane with her eyes still wet. He first, you need to see what our company becomes when no one is watching. Michelle Hart did not speak for several seconds. The conference room behind her was very quiet. Somewhere in that silence, Marcus knew something was shifting. Not the call, not the moment. Something in the architecture of a company he had spent years building. When she spoke, her voice was careful and controlled, which was different from before, and told him she understood the weight of what she was looking at. Captain Holt, she said through the phone speaker, this aircraft is not leaving the ground until this situation has been fully documented. Holt said, yes, ma'am. Miss Pierce, Michelle said. Her voice did not rise. Step away from the passenger. Lauren looked at the phone. Ma'am, I was following. Step away. Lauren took one step back, then another. The movement was small. It was also not small at all. Sandra Mills watched the exchange. She had worked in a world where authority was often communicated loudly. What she was watching right now was authority communicated without volume, and she noted, with something like professional appreciation, that it was considerably more effective. Marcus lowered the phone slightly. He looked at Lauren. He looked at Craig. He looked at Holt. He said, "Removal is not what I'm asking for." Lauren looks startled. So did Craig. "Not yet," Marcus said. "First, we document everything. Gate scan logs, seating records, crew communications, this conversation, all of it." He looked at Craig. "Stephen Rowe from legal will be in touch with you within the hour. Make sure every system record from this morning is preserved." Craig nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "Do not say yes because I am the chairman," Marcus said. "Say yes because every passenger on this aircraft deserves a record that cannot be rewritten after the fact." Craig's face colored. The "yes, sir," he said this time was different in tone than the first one. Quieter, more careful. Sandra Mills looked at Marcus. "Sir, do you want us to remain until a company representative arrives?" "Yes," Marcus said. "And I want any passenger who wishes to speak with someone from customer relations to have access to them at the gate." He paused. "Not just the passengers involved. Anyone who was present. People do not need to be the target to be affected by what they witness." Kevin Greer said, quietly and with something that was not quite rehearsed, "Sir, I owe you an apology. I came in ready to act on what I was told without asking my own questions." Marcus looked at him. "Thank you." Then he said, "That feeling you have right now, remember it the next time someone calls you about a passenger." Greer nodded. He looked like he meant it. Lauren had moved to stand near the galley. She was holding her own wrist with her opposite hand, a small unconscious gesture, the kind of thing a person does when they are trying to hold themselves together. She was looking at the floor. She had not looked at Marcus again since he quoted her own words back to her. The thing she had said, "I would never have done this if I had known who you were," was still in the air. She knew it. She could feel everyone in the cabin holding it. And she knew, with the particular clarity that comes in the aftermath of public humiliation, that it was the most honest thing she had said all morning. More honest than the flag in the system. More honest than the concern about cabin order. More honest than any of the procedures she had cited. She had not seen a man who had a right to be in the seat. She had seen a man she thought did not belong there. And she had spent 20 minutes constructing an official reason for something that had no official reason at all. The card on the tray table had not changed any of that. It had only made it impossible to pretend otherwise. Pamela Chase and Stephen Rowe arrived through the aircraft door at 7:59. They moved through first class quickly, assessing the cabin the way people assess a situation they have been briefed on at high speed and are still catching up to. Pamela looked at Marcus first, then at the card still on the tray table, then at the faces around her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, addressing the cabin at a volume everyone could hear, "this flight has been delayed because a passenger was treated unfairly in his assigned seat. We are reviewing the matter now. We appreciate your patience." The businessman in row 4 raised his hand. "So he wasn't doing anything wrong?" Pamela looked at Marcus, then back at the passenger. "Based on everything we currently know, no. He was not." Those words settled into the cabin like something heavy finding its resting place. A few people exhaled. One woman near the window put her hand over her mouth. Raymond Cole, in seat 2C, opened his eyes and stared at the closed tray table with an expression Marcus could see reflected in the window glass. A man performing the arithmetic of his morning and arriving at a sum he did not like. And arriving at seat B. The aircraft sat still on the tarmac. The engines were quiet. The runway beyond the window was pale gray and empty and wide. But something in the cabin had begun to move. Not the aircraft, not yet. Something else. Something that had needed to move for a long time. Stephen Rose moved through the cabin quietly. He was 44 years old with a lean face and reading glasses on a chain around his neck. And he carried the thin laptop with the care of someone who understood that what was on it would matter later. He stopped beside Diane Foster. Ma'am, he said, I understand you recorded most of the incident. Diane looked at him. She had been expecting this, or something like it, but being expected did not make it less strange. She said, will it be used against anyone? Stephen Rowe opened his mouth. E. Marcus said from 2A without turning around, it will be used to protect the truth. Diane looked at the back of Marcus's head. She let out a slow breath. Then, yes, she said, E. Stephen Rowe handed her a business card and asked her to send the original file to a secure company address. She would receive an automated confirmation. She would not be asked to provide anything else tonight. E. She would not be named in any public statement without her explicit approval. E. He said all of this in the quiet, methodical way of a person who had trained for many years to communicate clearly, in rooms where people were frightened or angry or both, and who had learned that the fastest way to earn cooperation was to offer something first. Diane took the card. She looked at it for a moment. Her hand was steadier now than it had been an hour ago, or however long this had been. She was not sure anymore. Time had moved strangely since she raised the phone. Pamela Chase had gone to the front of the cabin to speak with Captain Holt in a low, rapid exchange that the passengers could not fully hear. Holt's posture during this conversation was different from his posture in the aisle. He was standing with slightly less height to him, the incremental adjustment of a man no longer performing command, but genuinely listening. Craig Whitfield stood near the galley partition with his tablet at his side. He had not looked at the screen in quite some time. Lauren was somewhere behind him, in the area between the galley curtain and the passenger section, where the light from the cabin reached but the oversight was slight less. She had not spoken in several minutes. Marcus had been reading, or at least he had been looking at the tablet propped on his knee. Whether he was talking books the condo was taking in, the words on the screen was harder to say. His eyes moved, but slowly. He was present in the way that a man is present when part of him is still processing something. The older woman near the window in seat 1A had been quiet for the entire morning. Her name was Evelyn Ross, 73 years old, retired schoolteacher, traveling to Phoenix to visit her youngest son and his family. She had watched everything with her handbag pressed to her lap and her lips pressed slightly together. Now she reached into her bag and removed which she pressed carefully to the corner of her eye. She was not crying. She was close to it. She thought of her late husband, who had been refused service at a restaurant in Atlanta in 1964 and had come home and eaten a cold plate of food at the kitchen table without saying a word about it, because there were no words for it that he was willing to say in front of their children. She thought about how much the world had changed in 60 years. She thought about whether it had changed enough. She did not know the answer. She suspected no one did. Raymond Cole in seat E2C was looking at his watch. 11:15, his connection. The buffer was gone. The math was no longer comfortable. He thought about the client he was supposed to meet in Phoenix, a man named Gerald Farrow, who did not like to be kept waiting, who had a way of expressing displeasure that sounded like calm reason, but left you feeling like you had been reduced in some fundamental way. Raymond was not looking forward to that call, and yet he was not the word that Gerald Farrow either. He was thinking about word that Marcus Webb had used when Raymond told him to make things easy. Easy for whom? 2 words. Raymond had been in business for 30 years. Contracts worth millions. He had argued with lawyers, with boards, with regulators. He was not someone who ran out of things to say. He was not someone who ran out of things to he had run out of things easy for whom. That bothered him. Returned from the front of the cabin and came to stand near Marcus's row. And came to stand in front of me. She spoke quietly. Mr. Webb, we can arrange for a replacement crew. It will delay the flight further, but the option is on the table. Marcus said, how long? 90 minutes. Perhaps 2 hours. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at the cabin. He looked at the passengers who were still there, the ones who had not yet decided whether to stay or go. He looked at Diane with her card from Stephen Rowe. He looked at Raymond Cole staring at his watch. He looked at Evelyn Ross with her tissue. He said, before any decision is made about the crew, I want every passenger on this aircraft given the option to depart without penalty. B. No documentation requirement, no questions asked. An explanation of the delay provided in writing. And a customer relations representative available at the gate for anyone who wants to talk. Pamela nodded. Done. Marcus added, B. Not just for the passengers directly involved. B. For everyone. He paused. People do not have to be the target of something to be harmed by it. Sometimes watching is its own wound. Pamela was quiet for a second, and in that second her expression changed by some small degree. She had been in this job for 11 years. She had handled complaints, press incidents, operational failures. She had been trained to manage situations. She had not, in 11 years, heard a chairman of the board use flags. Sometimes watching is its own wound. During the management of an incident he was at the center of, she filed it without comment, but she turned to the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice steady and warm. Any passenger who would like to disembark at this time may do so. There will be no penalty, no questions, and full rebooking assistance will be available at Gate C19. B. We will also have written explanations of this morning's delay at the gate, and a customer relations representative will be present for anyone who wants to speak with someone. A murmur moved through the cabin. Not loud, more like a collective exhale. A few passengers stood. A mother in row 5 was the first. She gathered her bag in her adult son's arm with the practiced motion of a woman used to leaving places quickly. As she passed Marcus's row, she stopped. She looked at him. She did not say anything at first. Then she said, my husband was removed from a flight in Memphis ago. For no reason, she stopped. He never talked about it after. Marcus looked at her. She said, he died last spring. I'm sorry, Marcus said. She nodded. Then she moved toward the door, her son's hand at her elbow. Evelyn Ross stood slowly, gathering her handbag. She stopped beside Marcus' row and looked at him. I should have spoken earlier, she said. He looked up at her. You are speaking now. That doesn't feel like enough. It rarely does, Marcus said. But it is where courage starts. She touched the headrest of his seat gently, the way a person touches something to make sure it is real. Then she moved on. Several other passengers left. Not many. Most stayed. The cabin had that quality of a room, after a long, difficult conversation, where people are still holding the weight of it, not sure what to set it down onto. Raymond Cole had not moved. He sat with his fingers laced together on his closed tray table, staring at the surface. Finally, he turned toward 2A. My name is Raymond Cole, he said. Marcus looked at him. I know who you are now, Raymond, and said. He tried for a small laugh. It came out embarrassed instead. I said some things this morning that... He stopped. His voice had gone lower than he intended. I wanted the situation resolved because I had somewhere to be. I didn't care how. He swallowed. My wife used to say that convenience makes cowards out of decent people. She said it a lot, actually. She sounds like she was wise, Marcus said. Raymond nodded. She passed last winter. A pause. Marcus said, I'm sorry for your loss. Raymond blinked hard. She would have been ashamed of me today. The words were heavy. He did not say them to perform regret. He said them because they were true. Marcus studied him for a moment. Then he said, maybe she would have expected you to do better next time. Raymond looked at him, startled by something in the answer he had not anticipated. He had expected something sharper, something that matched what he deserved. The mercy in the response was harder to absorb than a reprimand would have been. Lauren Pierce, standing near the galley, heard it. She had been standing there because she did not know where else to go, and leaving the first-class section would have required walking past Marcus Webb. And she could not make herself do that yet. She had heard Farkas said to the passengers. She had heard his instructions to Pamela. She'd heard his response to Evelyn Ross. She had heard what he said to Raymond Cole. She had expected anger. She had braced for it the way a person braces for something they know is coming. Anger she could have worked with. Anger she could have internally categorized as someone being difficult or being powerful or being anything other than what was actually happening. What was actually happening was a man who had every reason to use this moment to cause maximum damage to her professionally and personally, and B, who was instead conducting himself as if the only thing he was accountable to was what was right. That was harder to defend against than anger. She pressed her fingers against her wrist. She thought about the thing. She had said, I would never have treated you this way if I had known who you were. She had not said it to admit anything. She had said it to explain, to mitigate, to offer context. B. What Marcus had done with it was strip it down to what it actually was. The admission that this had never been about policy, about procedures, about flags in the system. It had been about what she saw and what she assumed and what she did with both of those things. She did not know what to do with that yet. She was not sure she would know for a long time. B. Stephen Rowe had finished his initial conversation with Diane and was now speaking quietly with Pamela. The legal framework for the morning was being assembled in real time. What needed to be preserved? B. What needed to be reviewed? What would happen next in terms of process? These were things Marcus would weigh in on, but later. Right now he was watching the cabin. He was watching the people who had stayed, B, holding the weight of a morning they had not planned for, B. Outside, the runway was still gray. A thin line of pale light had appeared at the horizon, not sunrise, that had come and gone before boarding. Something else, a break in the cloud cover, maybe. The kind of light that sometimes arrives when the worst of a storm is not over but has moved far enough that you can start to see what it left behind. Marcus looked at it for a moment. Then he picked up his tablet, B. He opened a new document. At the top, he typed 3 words. He stared at them for a moment. Then he kept writing. The words came slowly at first, and then steadily, the way a person writes when the thing they are writing has been forming in them for a long time and is only now finding the surface. The replacement crew arrived at 8:17, the way flight crews always do. Orderly, always do. And pressure B, carrying their things in the compact way of people accustomed to narrow spaces. The lead attendant was a woman named Teresa Blake, raised 30 years old, with a calm face and a measured pace that said she had been briefed on what had happened in this cabin, decided to respond to it by being exactly what a flight attendant was supposed to be. No more and no less than aisle. She made Tinat Apask with passengers as she passed. B. She did not over-explain or over-apologize. When she reached seat 2A, she stopped. Mr. Webb, she said, I'll be serving this cabin for the rest of the flight. Before we continue, is there anything you need? Marcus looked at her badge, then at her face. Water, please. Of course. It was a simple exchange, 4 sentences between 2 people. And yet, after everything that had preceded it, the exchange felt like something had been restored that had been taken in. B. Teresa returned in less than a minute with a glass of water on a small napkin. She set it on the tray table without ceremony, without performance, B, without the corrective overreach of someone trying to make up for what someone else had done. Just water, just a small courtesy offered with full attention. Marcus looked at her. Thank you, Miss Blake. You're welcome, Mr. Webb. B. She moved on. Lauren Pierce, who was still in the cabin, waiting to be formally relieved, and escorted by Pamela to the gate for a full account, watched the exchange from near the galley. She watched the glass of water. She watched the small nod. She watched the way Teresa Blake moved through the cabin, not afraid, not performing, just present. She realized something that she would carry with her for a long time after this morning, whether it had been hard to treat him yet. It had never been hard to treat him decently. B. It had simply required a willingness to see him first before any story she had decided to tell about what kind of person he was likely to be. She had not been willing. She understood that now with a clarity that did not feel good. Pamela touched her elbow. Lauren, she said quietly, we need to go. Lauren looked once more at seat 2A. Marcus had picked up his tablet again. He was not looking at her. He was reading. B, or writing. She could not tell. His face was focused and still. She turned and walked toward the door. She did not know that the video Diane had taken would be viewed by 4 million people within 48 hours. She did not know that her name would be in a company press release by Friday. She did not know that the hearing she would attend the following week would feel very different from any hearing she had imagined. Not because people were cruel to her, but because people were trying to be fair, which was in some ways harder. In some ways hardy. She did not know any of this yet. She only knew that she was walking away from seat 2A and that the man she had tried to remove from that seat, Captain Holt, remained. He had spoken with Pamela for several minutes and with Marcus briefly in exchange. That like nothing like their earlier one, and with or something. Then he had gone to the front of the cabin and stood outside the cockpit door, holding the interphone handset. He had been standing there for a while. When he finally pressed the button, the sound of the tone carried through the cabin speakers. He lifted the handset. He looked at it. He looked at the passengers watching him. He looked at seat 2A. Then he pressed the button and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. His voice was not the voice he usually used for passenger announcements. It was quieter, rougher in texture, like something that had been polished, and the polish had been taken off. "This is Captain Holt. I want to speak to you directly about the delay this morning." The cabin did not move, he continued. "As captain of this aircraft, I am responsible for the safety and well-being of every passenger and crew member on board. This morning, I did not meet that responsibility as I should have. A passenger was challenged in his assigned seat in a way that was not supported by facts. And when that passenger responded calmly and lawfully, I escalated the situation rather than examining it. That was a failure. It was my failure. A baby somewhere in economy made a small sound. Nothing else." Holt held the handset. "We will be reviewing this incident fully with Apex Airlines leadership. I have requested personally to attend the first training session that comes out of that review." He paused. "I ask only that we treat one another with the basic respect this flight is capable of. Thank you for your patience." He set the handset down. No one applauded. The silence was not hostile. It was the silence of people who had heard something they needed time to hold. The silence of people understanding that the minimum requirement in a given moment is not the same as doing well, and that naming a failure is not the same as undoing it, but it is where undoing it. It is where undoing it begins. 2 rows back, a woman leaned toward her husband and whispered something. He took her hand, Evelyn Ross, who had returned to her seat after briefly stepping off the aircraft to speak with the customer relations representative at the gate. She had reboarded and settled back in with her bag at her feet. She had decided to stay. She was not entirely sure why. Something Centura had needed to see this through to wherever it was going to go. When Holt's announcement ended, she closed her eyes and let out a long breath. Marcus kept writing. The document was now 2 pages. He was not writing quickly. He was writing with the care of someone constructing something that needed to stand on its own without him in the room to explain it. A new policy was not a press release. It was not a statement of values. It was not a training module built around compliance. It was an account of a single morning in a first-class cabin, what had been assumed, what had been done with those assumptions, and what the consequences had been. It was an account followed by a set of requirements, not suggestions, requirements. Language that left no room for interpretation about what was mandatory and what was at the crew's discretion. He wrote, "Removal of a passenger from an assigned seat requires documented, specific observable conduct, not discomfort, not vague concerns about behavior, not the feeling that someone does not belong. Observable conduct, documented, reviewed." He wrote, "Witness accounts, whether from other passengers or crew, will be preserved and considered equally. A crew member's report does not supersede a passenger account by default." He wrote, "When a crew member's account and a passenger's account conflict, the default action is de-escalation and verification, not escalation and removal." He paused. looked out the window. The pale light that had appeared on the horizon was wider now, not yet bright, just there, steady. He wrote, "The purpose of this policy is not to restrict crew authority. The purpose is to ensure that crew authority is applied to its proper function, which is safety, and not to its improper function, which is enforcement of assumptions about who belongs where." Diane Foster had stowed her phone. She was reading, or trying to. The words on the page were not reaching her. She was thinking about her grandfather, about Birmingham, about what it meant to be brave when brave was not optional. She thought about the moment she had said, "He's been calm the whole time." She had not planned to say it. It had come out before the plan, and Lauren had told her to stay out of it, and she had not stayed out of it. And that had felt terrifying while it was happening, and very right of lot immediately afterward was something she did not yet have words for. She thought she might write about it later. She might write about it later. She was not a writer. She was a project manager from Chicago, but some experiences demand a form of record that is not video footage. Raymond Cole had leaned back in seat 2C and was looking at the ceiling. He had missed his connection. Gerald Farrow had received a short message from Raymond's assistant explaining an unavoidable delay, which was both true and not sent, almost laughably message insufficient. Raymond, because he did not know how to explain this morning in a message. He was not sure he could explain it in any format. He was not sure he fully understood it yet. What he understood was he had watched a man defend his right to sit in the seat he had purchased, and Raymond had sided against him because it was convenient to do so. He had not thought of himself as someone who did that. He had been wrong about himself. He was 57 years old. He had been wrong about himself before, in other ways. But this was a different category of wrong. This was the category his wife had been trying to tell him about for years. And he had listened the way men listen when they believe the conversation is about someone else. He would write the letter tonight. He did not know if Marcus Webb would read it. He did not know if it would matter. He thought his wife would want him to write it anyway. She had been a woman who believed that the things you had not said were the things that cost you the most in the end. He closed his eyes. He was very tired. At 8:51, Pamela Chase returned to the forward galley and conferred briefly with Teresa Blake. Then she came back to where Marcus was sitting and stood beside his row. "Mr. Webb," she said, "we're ready to continue the flight whenever you are." Marcus saved the document. He set the tablet in his lap. He looked out the window. The sky above O'Hare had cleared considerably since he had first sat down in seat 2A. The gray had thinned. Blue was visible in patches. The runway ahead was pale and long and open, the way runways look when everything else is ready and only the human decisions remain. "Whenever you are ready," he said. Teresa Blake came through the forward cabin door and began the safety announcement. Her voice was steady. Her gestures were clear and precise. She did not look flustered. She did not look like a person performing normalcy. She looked like a person doing her job with complete attention, which was all that had ever been required, and which was the thing this cabin had needed from the beginning. When the engines began to rise, Marcus felt it before he heard it. A low vibration in the fuselage, moving up through the seat. He looked at the runway, beginning to slide past the window. He looked at the gray, blue sky ahead. He thought about the board call that afternoon. He thought about the 3 words at the top of his document. Service to Tease. With dignity. 3 words. He had been thinking them for a long time. He had assumed the company was living them. He understood now that assumption had been the problem. He topped the nose lifted. The runway fell away. Chicago became a grid of streets and rooftops, and then was covered by the cloud layer. And then there was only sky, pale and wide, the morning beginning to open. Flight 347 was in the air, almost 2 hours late, carrying a cabin full of people who had seen something they could not quite put down, carrying a chairman of the board who had 3 hours of fleet time, and a document that was going to change the way 30,000 employees understood what their job required of them. And carrying in seat 2A, a man who had simply wanted to fly to Phoenix and had paid the particular price that some men for sitting where they have every right to sit, and had chosen to spend that price on something that might matter. The flight took 3 hours and 14 minutes. For most of that time, and B, the first class cabin was quiet in a way that was unlike the usual silence of air travel. It was not the impersonal quiet of strangers, sharing a pressurized tube and agreeing, without discussion, to pretend each other did not exist. It was the quiet of people who had shared something and were still in it. Teresa Blake moved through the cabin with the steady attention of someone who had decided that every service interaction on this flight was going to be done completely and without haste. She refilled drinks without being asked. She checked in with each passenger at intervals that were close enough to be attentive and far enough apart to be respectful. When she brought Marcus his second glass of water, she did not ask if he wanted anything else. She saw that he was writing and that the writing required his full concentration, and she left him to it. He was still writing. The document had grown to 7 pages. In it, he had moved from the immediate account of the morning, what had been said, what had been done, what had been assumed, to something larger. He was writing about the architecture of the problem. Not Lauren Pierce specifically, not Captain Holt's 30-year habit of backing crew decisions without investigating them, not the booking system with its phantom flag that Craig Whitfield had invoked without checking. He was writing about the layer beneath all of those things. He was writing about what people were trained to trust and what they were not trained to question. When you train someone to protect schedule above comfort, you create conditions where discomfort becomes justification for action. When you train someone to respect authority by proximity, a uniform, a title, a tone, you create conditions where authority can be wrong and no one near enough to see it clearly will say so. When you build an airline that runs on the assumption that efficiency is the highest value, you create an airline where the slowest thing, which is always a human being insisting on being treated as one, will eventually be treated as a disruption. He had not written a sentence about Lauren Pierce, and her written a sentence about Lauren Pierce and her instinct when she saw him in seat 2A. He did not need to. The instinct was a symptom. The system was the disease. And he had been running this company for 9 years. And this morning, it had shown him what it was in a way that 9 years of reports and metrics and quarterly reviews had not. Somewhere over the Colorado mountains, Diane Foster took out a small notebook. She had bought it at a bookstore in Chicago 4 months ago and had not written in it yet because she had not known what she was saving it for. She wrote for about an hour, not stopping, not reading back. She wrote what she had seen, what she had thought, what she felt when she raised the phone, and when she said, "He's been calm the whole time," and when Sandra Mills had said, "I asked him." She wrote about her grandfather. She wrote about the difference between watching and witnessing. She would not publish what she wrote. She would not for what she wrote. It was not for publication. It was for the part of her that needed a record to know something had happened, that she had been in the room, that she had not looked away. Raymond Cole slept for 40 minutes. He did not dream or did not remember dreaming. When he woke up, his connection was long past, and the aircraft was over Arizona. He looked out the window at the brown-red earth below, the kind of landscape that looks old, that makes you feel the smallness of a single human morning. He thought about his wife. He thought about the letter he was going to write. He thought about his son, who was 24 and working in technology in Austin, who had told Raymond at dinner 3 years ago about something that had happened to him at a hotel in Houston that Raymond had not fully listened to because his phone had buzzed at the exact wrong moment. And by the time he looked up, his son had changed the subject. He was going to call his son when he landed. That felt more important than the client call. Marcus finished the document when the aircraft was 40 minutes from Phoenix. He read it once through from the beginning, the way he read any document, before it left his desk, not looking for errors of grammar or logic, but looking for places where the truth was close but not quite there, where a sentence said what he meant but could be read another way, where he had been careful when he should have been direct when he should have been careful. He found 3 places. He revised them. He read those sections again. They were better. He sent the document to Patricia Reed with a single line of instruction. Before the board call, she would know what he meant. He had sent her documents before board calls before, but they had been acquisition strategies and operational reports and financial projections. He had never sent her a new policy document written at 37,000 feet in the aftermath of a man trying to remove him from his own airline. Then he closed the tablet and looked out the window. Phoenix was visible below now. The city spread across the desert in a flat, wide pattern. Streets and grids. Pools catching the midday sun. The airport approaching in the distance. He had been to Phoenix many times. He had sat in many board meetings here. He had approved many decisions from this city without being physically present, by phone or video, which was the modern version of running a company. He thought about the difference between managing a company from a distance and knowing what it was up to close. He had thought he knew. He had thought that the training programs and the annual reviews and the quarterly pulse surveys and the customer satisfaction scores and the operational metrics were of what the company actually was. He understood now that they were not. They were the measure of what the company appeared to be to people who were prepared for the measurement. What the company actually was what happened on a Tuesday morning in first class on flight 347 before anyone knew the chairman was watching. He had not planned to be on this flight. He had booked it late on Sunday night when a meeting in Chicago extended until the previous evening, and he missed his original flight. He had not told operations he was reboarding the Chicago-Phoenix route because it had seemed unnecessary. He had not told anyone he was on flight 347. That was the reason he had found out. He thought about that for a moment. He thought about how many flights he was not on, how many mornings he did not know about, how many seat 2. As across the country, his company was administering to people who did not have a slim black card in their jacket pocket. There was no way to know from a boardroom. There was no metric for it. The people it happened to either did not complain, because complaining required energy that some people could not afford to spend, or because past experience had taught them that complaining did not change anything, or they complained, and the complaints were processed by the same system that had produced the problem in the first place. This had to change. He had written 7 pages about how. He was not sure 7 pages was enough. Teresa Blake came through with a final check before landing. She stopped beside Marcus. Mr. Webb, she said, we'll be on the ground in about 35 minutes. Is there anything you need before we begin our descent? He looked at her. Thank you for this flight, he said. She seemed slightly surprised. Of course. No, he said. I mean specifically, for doing your job without making it into a performance. That sounds like a small thing. It is not. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said quietly, I was a passenger on a flight once where something like this happened to my uncle. I watched it happen and I didn't say anything. She stopped. I've thought about it ever since. When they briefed us on what had happened this morning before we boarded, I just thought, I need to do this right. He met her eyes. You did. She nodded and moved on. The aircraft began its descent. The Phoenix skyline grew below them, rising from the desert with the particular shimmer of a city that is permanently in sunlight. Marcus thought about his father again. He thought about the garage in Detroit, where his father had worked 6 days a week for 23 years. Debate about the grease under his fingernails at dinner, about the way his father would look at him across the table with the particular expression of a man who had worked hard enough that his children would not have to, and was satisfied by that even when the work was hard. His father had died before the company went public, before the board seat, before all of it. He had seen the early years, the first aircraft, the first route, the first headquarters that was nothing more than 4 leased offices and a shared conference room with a borrowed projector. He had not lived to see what it became. Marcus was glad sometimes that his father had not seen this morning. He was glad for other reasons today that he had been there to see it himself. The wheels touched down with the familiar pressure and speed of a long approach, resolved. The runway rush tapped at the window, the brakes pulling, the engine noise dropping. Phoenix. 11:14 in the morning. Almost 2 hours late. No one in the first class cabin moved until the aircraft had fully stopped. And the seatbelt sign went off. Then people moved with the focused efficiency of travelers who have somewhere to be. Bags from overhead compartments, phones coming on, the resumption of ordinary life. Marcus sat still until the aisle was mostly clear. Then he picked up his briefcase. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the seat he had been sitting in since 7:42 that morning, the wide leather, the tray table where he had placed his documents, the window with its view of the desert floor, seat 2A, his seat, as it had been from the beginning. He walked toward the door. Teresa Blake was standing at the forward exit. She said, "Mr. Webb, safe onward." He nodded. "Take care, Miss Blake." He stepped off the aircraft and into the jet bridge. The air was dry and bright. Somewhere ahead, a customer relations team was waiting. Somewhere ahead, a boardroom full of people who needed to understand something they had been insulated from understanding. Somewhere ahead, a company that needed to be different from what it had been this morning. He walked toward it. Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport had the particular quality of desert airports in late morning, bright, wide, the kind of light that found every surface and left nothing in shadow. The jet bridge from Gate C4 led into a terminal corridor that smelled of coffee, and jet fuel, and the dry warmth that seeped in from outside, and Marcus Webb walked through it the way he had walked through airports for 20 years, at a pace that was not rushed, with his briefcase at his side, his jacket straight, his expression settled. When he came out into the terminal proper, people recognized him, or not him specifically. Most people in Phoenix Sky Harbor at 11 in the morning would not have recognized Marcus Webb on sight. They recognized the situation. They had seen it. Diane's video had been sent at 7:58 that morning, and it had moved with the particular velocity that things move in this era when they are both outrageous and truthful. By the time Flight 347 touched down, the footage had been picked up by 2 national news aggregators and a very large airline industry account that had 60,000 followers. And the title it was circulating under was Apex Airlines Chairman asked to leave his own plane. The footage was about 8 minutes long. People had watched all of it. A man near the corridor looked at Marcus, then at his phone, then back at Marcus. He said nothing, but the recognition was visible in his face. Further along, a group of 3 women in their 50s, clearly traveling together, saw him, and one of them touched the arm of another, and they watched him pass without speaking. Marcus did not slow down. He did not nod or wave. He was not here to perform resolution. He was here to get to a boardroom. The customer relations team was waiting at a set of chairs near the gate. Pamela Chase had flown on a different Apex flight and arrived slightly before Marcus. She was standing with 3 members of the team, 2 of them in company blazers and one of them in street clothes, who turned out to be from the company's communications department. Diane Foster came out of live jet bridge a few minutes after Marcus. She was scanning for the customer relations team, and when she found it, she walked directly toward Pamela. She had her phone and the card Stephen Rowe had given her, and she held them out in a way that said she had decided what she was going to do and was doing it before she could second guess herself. Pamela shook her hand. She introduced the communications contact, who asked a few clear and practical questions about the footage, what the original file format was, whether Diane had sent it anywhere else yet, whether she had any objection to the company citing her as a witness in their internal investigation statement. B. Diane answered all three questions directly. She had not sent it anywhere else. She had no objection to being cited. She would appreciate being told in advance if her name appeared in anything public. All three, Pamela confirmed. Diane. She looked at Marcus, who was standing a few feet away, speaking quietly, with another going over to him. She thought about what's about his team. She thought about what she would say. When fighted, towel. It be. She decided she had already said it, or at least the most important part of it, on the aircraft, with her phone raised and her voice shaking, when she said he's been calm the whole time. She got her rebooking sorted out with the customer relations team and sat down in the gate chair to wait for her new flight. She took out the small notebook. She wrote three more sentences. She closed it. E. Raymond Cole came through the terminal, looking like a man who had decided something on the aircraft and was carrying the decision carefully, the way you carry a full glass when you are trying not to spill. He spotted Marcus across the gate area. He walked toward him, not fast, but with the directed purpose of someone who knew what they needed to do and was going to do it before the courage of the moment. Marcus saw him coming. Raymond stopped in front of him. They were roughly the same height. Raymond was stockier, with the build of a man who had spent decades in rooms, where being physically present was part of how you commanded them, and had let that build soften slightly in recent years. He looked at Marcus with an expression that was not comfortable to look at because it was honest. I meant what I said on the plane, Raymond said. Marcus waited. Raymond said, I wrote you an email on the flight. He paused. I didn't send it because I don't have your email address. He looked briefly as if this were funny, but only briefly. I wanted to tell you that I'm going to call my son tonight. He had something happen to him 3 years ago, and I half listened. I'd like to actually listen this time. Marcus looked at him. Raymond said, I think that's the best I can do right now. He shifted his briefcase strap. I wanted you to know I understand that's not enough, but I want to do the thing I can do. Marcus nodded slowly. That is a beginning, he said. Not a small one. Raymond held out his hand. Marcus took it. They shook. It was brief and firm. Then Raymond Cole turned and walked toward the Apex customer service desk to rebook his missed connection, and Marcus watched him go. The boardroom was on the 14th floor of the Apex Airlines Phoenix headquarters, a building 3 miles from the airport, accessible by company shuttle in under 8 minutes when traffic was light. Marcus arrived at 12:47. The room had a long oval table in dark wood, 12 chairs, a wall of glass overlooking the desert skyline, and a screen at one end that was currently dark. 11 people were already seated. The remaining chair at the head of the table was his. No one spoke when he entered. Patricia Reed. At the far end stood briefly and then sat again. A few others nodded. The room had the quality of a room full of people who had received information during the morning that required a significant revision of something they had believed to be true, and who were not yet sure what to do with the revision. Marcus set his briefcase on the table. He did not open it. He looked at the people around the table, the chief financial officer, the vice president of operations, the heads of legal and communications and customer experience, the 2 independent board directors who had been able to join on short notice. He looked their faces, careful, watchful, preparing to agree with whatever he was about to say, because that was what people prepared to do in a room where the person at the head had arrived, carrying the morning he had arrived carrying. He did not want agreement. He wanted reckoning. This morning, he said, I saw our company without its mask. I was not looking for what I found. I was flying to Phoenix for a board call. I was in seat 2A because I booked a first-class ticket. I sat down and kept quiet, the way I've always been able to keep quiet in situations that other people would have found difficult because I have had extensive practice. A few faces around the table changed, he continued. Our crew challenged my presence in a first-class seat without a factual basis. They escalated without verifying. They called for my removal without evidence of any policy violation. And when I declined to go, they called airport security. The chief financial officer said, "Marcus," he raised one hand, not finished, to assign. The room was quiet. He said, "I'm not telling you this to assign blame to individuals. B. Lauren Pierce, Craig Whitfield, Captain Holt. They are the visible face of a systemic problem. What they did this morning, they did within a culture that we built. A culture that trained them to protect schedule, B, protect authority, protect the brand. We did not train them adequately to protect human dignity. We did not train them to ask why before they acted, B. We did not give them a framework for what to do when their instinct conflicted with their instruction, B." He looked around the table. "I spent the flight writing a new policy." He opened his briefcase and removed a stack of printed pages. B. He had printed them in the business center of the company's Phoenix office before coming upstairs. He slid copies down the table. "Read the whole thing before we discuss," he said. "Not summaries, not headlines, all 7 pages." B. The room was quiet for 10 minutes. Just the sound of paper turning, the soft hiss of the building's ventilation system. B. The muted desert light coming through the wall of glass. When the last person set their copy down, Marcus spoke again. "3 things are going to happen immediately," he said. "First, B, every flight crew in the Apex fleet is going into mandatory bias awareness training within 45 days. Not a video module, not a 30-minute module that can be completed on a phone during a layover. B, a full-day session run by a qualified external trainer with experience in aviation." B. He looked at the vice president of operations. He nodded. "Second, passenger removal from any assigned seat now requires documented, specific conduct, not a feeling, not a vague concern. Documented conduct, B, reviewed by a supervisor before escalation. If there is uncertainty, the default action is verification, not removal." He looked at the head of legal. She nodded. "Third, every witness account in any passenger incident, B, whether from crew or passengers, is preserved in full and reviewed without hierarchy. B. A passenger's account has the same evidentiary weight as a crew member's in the initial investigation. We stop assuming the crew is right by default. We start establishing what is actually true." He looked at Patricia Reed. B. She had not spoken since he entered the room. She was looking at the document in her hands with the expression of a person reading something they knew they should have written first. "We failed this morning," Marcus said. "Not as individuals, as a company. B. That failure belongs to all of us in this room, including me, because I have been running this company for 9 years, and I did not know until today that this is what it was capable of being." "Silence," he said. "The video is going to be seen by a very large number of people. Our response to this cannot be a statement. Our response has to be change. Visible, documented, measurable change. B. If the statement comes first and the change comes later, people will know. They always know." Patricia said quietly, "What do you need from us?" Marcus looked at her. "I need you to move fast enough that the policy is in effect before the news cycle peaks. And I need you to communicate to every employee in this company why it changed. Not what changed. Why? Because if they do not understand why, they will comply with the new procedure to be when they think they are being watched, and they will revert when they think they are not." He picked up his copy of the document. He looked at the room. "This is where we start," he said, "not where we finish." The board meeting lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. By the time it ended, the press release had been drafted and reviewed. The training contract had been sent to the external firm. B. The new removal policy had been routed through legal for final sign-off. And Sandra Mills had received an invitation via a personal call from Patricia Reed to participate as an advisor in developing the new airport security response protocol. Marcus walked out of the building into the Phoenix afternoon. The sun was high and the heat was dry, pressing against his suit jacket in a way that felt different from Chicago's morning cold. And cold, he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and took a breath. The shuttle back to the airport was 3 minutes away. He had a return flight to Chicago at 4:30. He had not booked it yet. He picked up his phone. He booked seat 2A. The weeks after moved fast and slow at the same time, the way weeks do, when something has happened that everyone is still sorting out what to make of. B. The video of Flight 347's first-class cabin circulated for 11 days before it began to subside. In those 11 days, it was watched by more than 8 million people. B. It was discussed in aviation industry forums, in corporate communications newsletters, in break rooms, in dinner tables, in hospital waiting areas, and school staff lounges. B. People who had experienced something similar and watched it and felt for the first time that what had happened to them had a name and a shape. B. People who had not experienced something similar watched it and understood, or began to understand, or began to want to understand. Apex Airlines issued its statement on the evening of the incident. B. It was not a statement designed by a crisis communications firm. It was the document Marcus had written on the flight, translated into a form accessible to the public. 7 paragraphs. B. No corporate language about taking these matters seriously. No promise to conduct a thorough review. B. Just what happened, what it revealed, and what was going to change. The response from the public was not uncomplicated. Nothing about this was uncomplicated. People debated the statement. People debated the video. People debated whether the outcome would have been different if Marcus Webb had not been the chairman of the airline he was being removed from. That last question was the one that stayed in the air the longest. B. Because the honest answer was yes, the outcome would almost certainly have been different. And that honest answer pointed to all the ways the system had not changed at all, only been interrupted. Marcus read those responses. B. He did not engage with them publicly. He read them with the attention of someone monitoring the accuracy of a diagnosis. Lauren Pierce's suspension lasted 3 weeks. At the end of the 3rd week, B. She attended a 4-hour meeting with the airline's HR department. B. Her union representative and a mediator from the external training firm. The meeting was not pleasant for anyone. It was honest, which was different. Lauren wasn't fired. She was removed from first-class service pending completion of full training program, then reassigned to a different route after that. She did not send Marcus a letter. She was not sure what to say. She was still not sure a year later. B. Captain Holt completed the bias awareness training on the first day it was offered to flight staff. He sat in the front row. He brought a legal pad and took notes. At the end of the session, the trainer asked if anyone wanted to share reflection. Holt raised his hand. He talked for 3 minutes. He said he had been operating on a trust the crew framework for 30 years, and he understood the difference now. He said he understood trust with bypass. He said it in the direct, uncomfortable way of a man who was not interested in being forgiven but was interested in being different. The trainer in being noted it. Others in the room noted it. Several younger crew members said later that they had come in skeptical about the training and had left feeling like it might be real. Holt's participation was part of why. Sandra Mills met with Patricia Reed in mid-September. The meeting was to discuss the new airport security response protocol, of which Sandra had been asked to be a co-designer. She brought 7 pages of her own, notes she had kept over 20 years, about the patterns she observed at security checkpoints, about the situations that escalated because of assumptions, and the ones that de-escalated because of patience. She had never shown these notes to anyone. She had kept them in a binder in the bottom drawer of her desk. When Patricia Reed asked where they came from, Sandra said she had always been watching. She had just never had a reason to believe anyone wanted to look. Patricia Reed said, "We do now." Diane Foster wrote about her experience for an online publication that covered workplace culture and civil rights. The piece was titled, "What It Costs to Not Look Away." It was read by 240,000 people in its first week. She received emails from flight attendants, from security officers, from passengers, from a man who said he had been asked to move from his assigned seat on a domestic flight in 1998 and had moved without saying anything, and had thought about it ever since. She could not answer every email. She answered as many as she could. Raymond Cole called his son David on the afternoon he landed in Phoenix while he was sitting in the rebooking line. The call lasted 11 minutes. Raymond told him about that morning. Raymond told him about that morning. He told him about the woman who had been traveling with her adult son and about the word that Marcus had used, easy for whom's. He told David about the dinner conversation 3 years ago that Raymond had half listened to. He said he was sorry he had not listened. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Dad, I didn't know you remembered that dinner." Raymond said, "I remember it. I just didn't know I was supposed to do something with it." There was another pause. Then David said, "Do you want me to tell you what happened at the hotel?" Raymond said, "Yes. I want to know everything." That conversation lasted 47 minutes. Raymond sat in the rebooking line and did not notice when he drunk the front of it vivid, and the agent waited patiently and did not rush him. He wrote Marcus a letter the following week. It was 320 words. He handwrote it because that felt correct for a letter that was about something real. He sent it to the Apex Airlines corporate address in Phoenix and included a note asking that it be forwarded to Mr. Webb. He did not know if Marcus would receive it. He suspected large companies had systems for handling that kind of mail. The letter arrived on Marcus's desk 20 days after the flight. He read it once. He put it in the drawer where he kept things he had decided to keep. It was not a large drawer, a few photographs, a letter his mother had written him when he turned 40, a short note from his father written in the year before he died, in the large, careful handwriting of a man who had not written many letters, but understood when one was required. Raymond's letter went in alongside those. Apex Airlines published its first quarterly report after the incident with a new Senate section. It was titled Accountability and Culture. It contained, among other things, the removal policy in full, the training completion numbers, the new witness documentation protocol, and a summary of Sandra Mills's advisory work. It also contained, in the last paragraph of the section, a single sentence that Marcus had insisted remain in every version. "We publish this not because we believe we have solved the problem, but because transparency is the only way to be held to what we say." The aviation industry publication that covered the story called it the most substantive policy change to come out of a passenger incident in 20 years. Marcus did not read the coverage. He was on a flight to Atlanta. He was in seat 2A. He had a tablet and a briefcase and merger document B and a board call at 2 in the afternoon. He had boarded at the back of the line, thanked the gate agent by name, waited his turn. The gate agent had said, "Have a great flight, Mr. Webb." Marcus had said, "Thank you." He had not corrected her. He was not sure if she knew who he was or if she was simply good at her job. He decided it did not matter which. The flight took an hour and 50 minutes. Nothing happened. A man in 2C read a magazine the whole time. A woman behind him slept before the wheels left the ground. The flight attendant brought Marcus coffee without being asked, because it was her job to notice when a passenger was working and might want it. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Of course." That was the whole exchange. He landed in Chicago. He thought about the morning in Chicago. He thought about the quiet in the cabin after Sandra Mills read his name and title aloud. He thought about what Lauren Pierce had said when she thought it would explain something. "I would never have done this if I had known who you were." He thought about the weight of that sentence and what it asked of every person who ran anything or served anyone. He had been thinking about it for 3 months. He expected to keep thinking about it for a long time. He walked through the Atlanta terminal toward his meeting. The airport was full of the ordinary rush of a weekday, people moving in every direction with the focused energy of travelers who know where they are going. He moved among them, a man in a dark suit with a worn leather briefcase. Nothing about the phrase they had landed on anything. He thought about a phrase they had landed on in the training rooms. The phrase that had come out of The 7 pages he wrote at 37,000 feet, distilled by the people who turned policy into practice. E. Repeated now in training sessions in Chicago and Phoenix and Atlanta and Denver and 14 other cities where Apex Airlines operated. See the person first, not the seat, not the clothes, not the skin, not the assumption. E. The person. He had not known when he walked through Gate C-19 at O'Hare on a gray Tuesday morning. E. That the day was going to require something of him. He had not chosen to be a lesson. He had chosen to fly to Phoenix. He had chosen to delay. But that sometimes happen days, lating was a contain what they contain. And the only question a person can answer in a day like that is what they do with it while it is happening. He had not shouted. He had not begged. He had not diminished himself. He had asked for what was fair and stayed seated until fair was possible. And then he had spent the flight writing the shape of a better company. That felt like enough. It also felt like a beginning. He had learned a long time ago that beginnings and endings were rarely as distinct from each other as people hoped. You ended one thing by starting another, and the starting was the work. He had a lot of starting left to do. There are mornings that stay with a person long after the calendar has moved on. Marcus Webb was a man who had trained himself over 4 decades to be precise about what he held and what he released. The instinct came from his father, who had been precise the same way, not cold, not unfeeling, but economical with the weight he kept. His father had said once, when Marcus was about 12 years old, and had come home from school carrying something that was hard to put down, you can keep everything that happened to you, son, or you can keep what it gave you. You can't carry both forever without something breaking. He had thought about that many times since the Tuesday morning in Chicago. He had kept what it gave him. 6 months after Flight 347, Apex Airlines had completed the first full round of bias awareness training across all domestic crew. The compliance rate was 94%, with the remaining 6% scheduled to complete the program within the next 30 days. The passenger removal policy was in effect. The witness documentation protocol was embedded in the incident reporting system. Sandra Mills had presented the new airport security response framework to 3 regional aviation authorities, and 2 of them had begun piloting elements of it in their own operations. The quarterly numbers were good. They were not the reason Marcus was satisfied. He was on a flight to Denver. It was a Tuesday morning again, which was not intentional. Or maybe it was, in the way that some things happen because you have organized your life around a lesson you are still learning. He had boarded at the back of the line. He had chosen a seat that was not 2A this time. He had chosen 7D, a middle seat in the main cabin, because he had wanted to see a different part of the aircraft. He did not tell operations he was on this flight either. The flight attendant working the main cabin was a young man named Anthony, 23, who had been with Lee for 8. Marcus learned this because Anthony introduced himself to every Tachem's pastor in his section before the safety demonstrators fraction that was entirely his own and was entirely his own. Ours entirely. He said his name and asked if anyone had any questions about the flight or needed anything before departure. He said it quickly, efficiently, without making it into a performance. Just, I'm Anthony. You've got me for this flight. Let me know if you need anything. Marcus listened to this. A woman across the aisle said she had a peanut allergy and was worried about the snacks in row 6. Anthony said he would check the manifest and make sure the rows within 20 feet of her were given non-nut options. She said, thank you. That usually takes 3 conversations with the crew to get sorted out. Anthony said, I'm sorry you've had to ask 3 times before. She looked at him with the particular relief of someone who had expected to have to fight for something ordinary and had not needed to. Marcus watched. He was not conducting an inspection. He was not making notes. He was watching the way a person watches something that is working correctly and is remembering why it was built. The flight took 1 hour and 40 minutes. Nothing significant happened. The turbulence over the Rockies was light. The coffee was decent. Anthony came by with a final check before landing and stopped beside Marcus. "You're Mr. Webb," he said. He had recognized him, apparently, from the company newsletter, which ran a photograph of Marcus on its front page every other month. He said it without alarm and without the visible recalculation that people sometimes perform when they discovered they were speaking to someone above them in the hierarchy. He said it the way a person says someone's name when they are simply naming what they see. Marcus said, "I am." Anthony said, "I wanted you to know. I did the training in October." He paused. "I thought about some things afterward. Things I used to do automatically that I hadn't realized were assumptions." Marcus looked at him. Anthony said, "I changed them." He said it simply, not as a performance of virtue, as a statement of fact. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me." Anthony nodded and moved on. The wheels touched down in Denver at 11:42. People stood and gathered their things. The overhead compartments opened with the familiar chain of sounds, latches, shuffles, the controlled chaos of retrieval. Marcus waited until the aisle was clear. He liked to wait. He had time. Walking through the Denver terminal, he passed a family of four, two parents, and two children under 10, navigating a stroller and two carry-on bags, and a stuffed giraffe that was in danger of being left behind. The father was trying to fold the stroller, while the mother held both children by the hand. Marcus stopped. He picked up the giraffe, which had fallen, and handed it to the smaller child. The child looked at him, then at the giraffe, then smiled with the complete uncomplicated sincerity that children have before they learn to modify their reactions. The mother said, "Thank you." Marcus said, "Of course." He walked on. It was an ordinary exchange. It did not require a chairman of a board or a policy change or a video that 8 million people had watched. It required nothing except two people in the same space. At the same moment, one of whom noticed that the other needed something small and gave it. That was where it lived, he thought. The real thing. Not in the documents. Not in the quarterly reports. Not in the press release, or the training compliance numbers, or the aviation industry recognition. It lived in ordinary exchanges conducted by people who had, for one reason or another, decided to see the person first. He had been thinking for months about what had changed and what had not. He had been honest with himself about both. The policy was better. The training was real. The culture was shifting in the way cultures shift unevenly, slowly, with people moving at different speeds, and some people resisting and some people surprising you with how ready they were to be different. Lauren Pierce was still with the airline. He had approved that decision carefully, and specifically because he believed that people who had done harm should be given the opportunity to become people who had reckoned with it. And that reckoning was harder work than punishment and more useful. He did not know what she had done with the reckoning. He would not, Nate took time, and the time was not his to control. These things took time, and the time was not his to control. Captain Holt had 10 assigned to lead a small working group developing a new crew de-escalation training module. He had accepted the assignment with the gravity of someone who understood it was not honorary. He had been in 3 working sessions already. People on the working group said he was the most useful person in the room. The world had not been fixed. He had not expected it to be. He was not, by nature, someone who expected the work clean endings. He was someone who expected the work to continue, and he had learned to find something that's sustainable rather than exhausting. He had learned it from his father, who had kept what the hard years gave him and released what they would not give back, who had eaten cold food at a kitchen table in Detroit and not said the words in front of his children that would have made the words necessary to say again and again until they calcified into something permanent and bitter, who had chosen instead to build something. Marcus Webb walked through the Denver terminal with his briefcase at his side and the desert light coming in through the wide terminal windows, and he thought about his father, and he thought about seat 2, and he thought about Anthony introducing himself to every passenger in his section because no one told him to, and he had decided it was the right thing to do. He thought about the young woman who had raised a shaking phone and said he's been calm the whole time. He thought about the retired teacher who had touched the headrest and said it doesn't feel like enough, and heard back that it was where courage starts. He thought about a man named Raymond Cole who had called his son from a rebooking line and listened for 47 minutes. He thought, the story does not end in the boardroom, A. It ends here, in the terminal, in the ordinary moments, B. In the exchange with Anthony and the giraffe left on the floor, and a child who smiled without modification because someone had stopped. He had spent 9 years building an airline. He was going to spend the next 9 building a culture that deserved the airline. That was the real destination. It had always been the real destination. He had simply needed a Tuesday morning in first class to see it clearly. The people in this story were not extraordinary. They were ordinary people in an ordinary airplane on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The extraordinary thing was what happened when one of them refused to accept that ordinary had to mean invisible, that ordinary had to mean being moved from a seat you paid for because someone looked at you and decided picture did not match the frame. Dignity is not a first-class feature. It is not an upgrade. It is not something you earn with a certain kind of ticket or prove with a certain kind of identification card. It is the baseline. It is what every human being boards with, regardless of seat assignment. Marcus Webb knew this. He had always known this. He was glad today that his company was learning it too. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the real work of making things better does not happen in boardrooms. It happens when enough people decide that ordinary decency is not optional. Subscribe if you believe that, and leave a comment with 3 words. See the person.